What's on, ladies and gentlemen? My name's Ross, I like games, and today, well, you see the lovely Alex Watkins, he who runs Organised Play for Fantasy Flight Games, and with whom I was lucky enough to cast the Vault Tour in Birmingham in May, he's gone and started collating some data about Keyforge tournaments. And what I find really interesting is that we've actually got 2 sealed Vault Tours now, played with Worlds Collide, where we can sit and start having a look at some data and some information. That makes me extremely happy. So I thought we'd have a little bit of a dig in and see what we can find. And for me, the #1 stat I'm looking for when trying to figure out which are the best houses is conversion rate. Now remember, we're playing a sealed Vault Tour. That is to say, you don't get a full choice of decks to play. You get to choose one of 3, and you go. Now the conversion rate is a percentage of decks of a particular house in day 2 compared to day 1. So if we start off at PAX Unplugged, which was the first one, we can see a gigantic drop-off for Logos, a fairly large drop-off for Untamed, and a moderate drop-off for Brobnar. There is also a tiny drop-off for Shadows, but nothing to get too worried about. So what we essentially see here is that Brobnar and Logos and Untamed aren't doing terribly well at the PAX Unplugged Vault Tour. But conversely, we see big jumps for Dis and the Grand Star Alliance, a fairly big jump as well for the Saurian Republic, showing that really those are the ones we're looking for. And if we have a look at the total house representation in day 2, we can see that the Saurian Republic and the Grand Star Alliance are the best represented decks that we've got. And there are some reasons for this. Brobnar is one of the weaker houses in general. In Worlds Collide, there aren't that many things to get excited about with Brobnar. When we looked at Age of Ascension, the second expansion, we saw that some decks had the combination of, say, Grunt Buggy and Iron Obelisk, which could really increase the cost of forging a key. So that kind of made sense. We saw that the Ganger Chieftain Drummernaut combination could clear the board or get a whole bunch of amber going on. So there were some really good things about Brobnar in Age of Ascension. I still wasn't a huge fan of them, but I could kind of see where they were coming from. Whereas if we have a look at Worlds Collide, there's just nothing that great about Brobnar. They're a big fighty house with poor amber control, who do lots of fighting but not much else. The one that surprised me about this was Logos, because there is a lot to like about Logos. Logos has Eddie, which is really good for increasing the cost of your opponent forging keys. Eddie's got a whole bunch of draw in the form of cards like Daughter and Babbling Bibliophile and Hapsis and all of these kind of things. Hapsis and Reassembling Automaton together form a pair of cards which are just really difficult to actually get rid of. You've still got Wild Wormhole for potential house cheating, etc. And to be honest with you, what Logos has always been good at is archiving and drawing cards, and they still are here as well. The Grand Star Alliance and the Saurian Republic, don't trust them. Don't trust them. Because there's 2 things going on at the very first ever sealed Vault Tour. #1, oh, they're new, I want to play them. And if you look at the representation, the Saurian Republic were the most played deck in day 1. 68 decks, the next highest was 50 with Logos, so please bear that in mind. But also, people don't really know how to play against them. Lots of new mechanics going on, lots of new cards, things that cannot necessarily be trusted. We're not just talking all they're fun, new and shiny, we're talking we don't have knowledge and experience of playing against them. By the time Worlds Collide drops, we've all played against Shadows and we're protecting our amber from being stolen. We've all played against Brobnar and we know that they're aiming to fight. We've not so much done that. And it's not just being able to play against it, it is selecting decks that will be good against them. But now let's have a quick flick and look at the same data for the Dallas-Fort Worth sealed tournament a week or so ago. And we see some startling differences. Brobnar still sucks. Sorry. And Shadows have actually gone down even more than they did last time. My explanation for Shadows, I'm afraid, is fairly simple. They're just not as good in Worlds Collide as they were in Call of the Archons and Age of Ascension, where they had really good cards, where they could just stop you forging in a fantastic way. They still had too much to protect, which is quite nice. And they still had Ronnie Wristlocks, which was quite nice. And they still had Brend the Fanatic. So it's not like there are no good cards out there, but the average Shadow suite is not as strong here as it was in previous sets. Doesn't mean you won't get some fantastic cards, and it doesn't mean you won't get some fantastic suites, but it does mean that on average they just weren't as strong. Shadow's domination essentially finally ended with Worlds Collide. But then we see some big differences. Untamed went from, yeah, it sucks, to no, actually we love Untamed. Both the Saurian Republic and the Grand Star Alliance all of a sudden were negative rather than positive, i.e. they had a smaller representation in Top Cut than we would expect, given the amount of them played in day one. And Logos has become great again. Now, I explained Logos a minute ago, and I stand by it. I think Logos are great in Worlds Collide. And I've got a couple of Logos decks I love. But I honestly think that the biggest thing we've got here is knowledge. We know what's going on now. Both of the decks in the final of the Vault Tour had Logos in and were Eddie decks. One of them had Hologramophone so that you could protect your Eddie so that it could stay on the field and keep increasing the cost of your opponent forging a key. Probably not a terrible coincidence. But why did the Saurian Republic and the Grand Star Alliance all of a sudden go from positive to negative? We don't have enough data, and I haven't been able to interview every player, but here are some of my thoughts. We're prepared now. We've played with and against those houses enough that the surprise factor is gone. Not only do we know what they do, but we've played against them, we know how to play against them, we got experience playing against them, and we can pick decks which are better against them. Now, it might just be a coincidence. It might just be that the decks with Saurian Republic and Grand Star Alliance opened at PAX Unplugged were better than the ones opened in Dallas-Fort Worth. But it doesn't really give us much data-wise there, does it? Untamed turned into a really big winner, but Untamed has a lot going for it in Worlds Collide. You've still got Key Charge to forge keys sneakily. You've got Molfin, who is a great counter for any kind of stealing. You've got Imprinted Murmook that reduces the cost of you forging keys. You don't have quite the crazy amber rushing we've had in the past, but then again, we've still got something like Flaxia that will grab you a good couple amber when you play it down. You've still got Fuzzy Gruen that will get you a couple of amber when you play it. There is still an awful lot to like about this. And again, I think there is a big argument to be made here that back at the first Vault Tour, players were wanting to play new things and gravitating towards those decks instead. I could be wrong, and if you disagree, let me know in the comments section. But the fact of the matter is, with a little bit of time to prepare, Untamed went from down 40 to up about 12. So why does that leave Dis? Does that leave Dis as the best house? It was the second most successful house in the first sealed Vault Tour, second only to the Grand Star Alliance, but then it was first about doubling any other house in the second. And I think there is a really strong argument that yes, It is just that gosh darn good. Because there are some phenomenal disc houses and disc suites and disc cards going around in Worlds Collide. One of the most talked about, of course, is Infernus. That one whereby when you play it down, you get to purge 2 cards from your opponent's discard pile, and your opponent loses amber equal to the total amber bonus on those cards. That's a pretty nice one. We've seen stuff like Born Knit coming along and just absolutely wrecking your opponent because you're just constantly purging their cards. We've seen things like Harbinger of Doom acting as a really good board wiping card, keeping your opponent in check. We've got Poltergeist acting as really good artifact control. Discs have always been the disruptive house. But I suppose the thing they started doing in Worlds Collide more than they started doing previously was purging. We saw quite a lot of purging. And maybe that's the thing that's made them so good. Imp Spectre, when it's destroyed, will purge a random card from your opponent's hand. I've already mentioned Infernus. I've already mentioned Born Knit. E on the fringes. E can go and do a whole bunch of purging here. Essentially, when you discard a discard from your hand, you can also then go and just purge a card from a discard pile. Guess which discard pile you're going to be purging from, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. Though annoyingly, you can only actually purge a discard, but like we've seen, disc turns up a lot, so that's still going to be quite good in those regards. It's the disruptive house. And whereas in Worlds Collide, Shadows just weren't as good at stealing as they were in previous expansions, it certainly looks a lot like in Worlds Collide, discs were just as disruptive as they'd ever been. We've still got ridiculous cards like Key to Dis and Onyx Knight, which can just wreck your opponent's board, but then we got a whole bunch of new tricks coming in as well, and frankly, ladies and gentlemen, that made all the difference. So there we go. That's what happened in terms of representation. Let me know if these are the kind of videos we want to see in the future. I will be happy to dig through more of these stats and bring you potential explanations. The only thing I can tell you for certain here is what happened in terms of the stats, but I think we've had a good discussion about why these things might have happened, and I think we said some sensible things. But maybe you disagree, or maybe you've got something else you want to add, or maybe you just want to chat Keyforge. Either way, I'd like to hear from you guys in the comment section. So go nuts, but do remember the rule, would ya? Be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, and follow me on Twitter at the Wossy, where we talk Transformers and Keyforge and Final Fantasy and Pokemon and lots of games, frankly. And then do please consider checking out patreon.com/PTCGradio, where you can find out about bonus podcasts and making me make videos and just support the channel. But by far the most important thing as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross and you've been watching Wossy Plays.